It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those perfectly ordinary days that you'd never expect to remember years later. I was halfway through a presentation for one of my biggest clients when my phone, sitting face down on the conference table, lit up and buzzed. The name Mom flashed across the screen. She never calls during work hours. My mom is the kind of person who still apologizes if she rings after 9 p.m. because it might be too late. So seeing her name pop up in the middle of the day sent a strange ripple of dread through me. I excused myself from the meeting with a polite smile and stepped into the hallway, my heels clicking on the polished floor. The building's air conditioning hummed faintly in the background. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Hey, Mom, is everything okay?" Her voice came through shaky, uneven. "Honey, your dad and we need your help. Financial help." I stopped in my tracks. Financial help? What happened? Are you okay? Did something happen to Dad? My mind jumped to hospital bills, car accidents, some nightmare scenario. There was a pause. Too long. We sold the house," she said finally, her words soft but heavy, like she was trying to wrap them in cotton so they wouldn't hit me too hard. I blinked. "What house?" "The house you grew up in. The one on Maple Street." My breath caught. I literally stopped walking, standing there in the middle of the hallway like someone had hit pause on me. I could almost see it in my mind. The pale blue siding, the front porch where Dad used to sit on summer evenings, the oak tree whose branches we climbed as kids. "You?" My voice cracked. "You sold it? When?" "6 months ago," she said, so casually it made my stomach twist. 6 months. 6 months without a single word to me or my brother. 6 months of smiling phone calls and everything's fine holiday visits. I leaned against the wall, feeling the cool paint against my back. "Why didn't you tell me?" "We didn't want you to overreact," she said quickly, "the way you might soothe a child before they start crying." "Overreact?" My voice went up a notch. "Mom, that was our home. You always said we needed the money," she interrupted, her voice turning defensive. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles whitening. "Fine. So, where is it? The money from the sale?" And then came the second blow. "It's gone." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "You sold a fully paid-off house in this market. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars." There was another pause, longer this time, filled only with the faint sound of her exhaling. "We spent it." My mind was already racing ahead, trying to imagine the scenarios that could justify this. Maybe Dad had some kind of massive medical procedure. Maybe they'd been blackmailed, scammed, or hit with debts I never knew about. "Spent it on what, exactly?" Her voice faltered. "We'll explain when you come over. Please, honey, we really need your help. We're going to lose the house if—" "House?" I interrupted again, completely thrown. "What house?" "The new one. We bought a new house." I had no idea what to say. I just stood there, phone pressed to my ear, hearing my mother's voice in a tone I'd never heard before. A strange mix of embarrassment and expectation, like she knew she'd crossed a line but assumed I'd step in to fix it. "I can't talk now," I said finally, my own voice shaking. "I'll come by tonight." And before she could say another word, I ended the call. The walk back into the meeting room felt surreal. My coworkers were still discussing budget allocations and quarterly targets like nothing in the world had shifted. I sat down, nodded when someone looked at me, but my mind was nowhere near the office. It was back on Maple Street, picturing the house standing there, but now owned by strangers. Strangers who didn't know about the time I broke my arm falling off the porch railing. Strangers who wouldn't understand why the upstairs bathroom window stuck every summer because the frame swelled in the heat. By the time I drove home that evening, the sun was dipping low, casting a golden light that made everything feel even more unreal. I tossed my work bag onto the couch, grabbed my keys again, and headed straight to my parents' new address. The one I'd only visited once, briefly, right after they moved in. Back then, I hadn't questioned how they could afford it. I just assumed they'd sold some investments or maybe dipped into retirement. Now I knew better, and I had the sinking feeling that whatever I was about to hear was going to be worse than I imagined. By the time I reached their new house, the streetlights were flickering on, one by one, like they were taking turns keeping watch over the quiet neighborhood. Their place was in one of those freshly developed subdivisions. Rows of nearly identical houses with perfectly manicured lawns, barely any trees older than a toddler. Everything smelled faintly of new paint and fresh asphalt. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a model home in a brochure. I parked at the curb and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My chest felt tight, like someone had cinched an invisible belt around my ribs. Finally, I made myself get out. When I knocked, my mom opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting right behind it. She was wearing one of those silky blouses she usually saved for church or holidays. Her lipstick was fresh. I recognized the look. She dressed up to soften the blow, hoping appearance would make the conversation easier. "Hi, honey," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad was in the living room, lounging in a massive leather recliner that looked brand new. He muted the giant flat-screen TV, easily 70 inches, and gave me a small nod. The place was immaculate, but in a way that screamed expensive rather than lived in. Thick rugs, glossy marble counters, a chandelier above the dining table. I couldn't stop my eyes from scanning every corner, mentally adding up the price tags. "Let's sit," Mom said, motioning to the couch. I sank into it, the cushions almost swallowing me whole. I folded my hands together, trying to keep my voice calm. "So, tell me what happened." Mom perched on the edge of an armchair, legs crossed, hands clasped. We'd been thinking about it for a while. The old place, it was getting harder to maintain. The roof needed work, the kitchen was outdated. And, well, we're not getting any younger. "That doesn't explain why you didn't tell me," I said. My voice was steady, but I could hear the undertone, the mix of hurt and disbelief. Dad shifted in his chair. "We didn't want you trying to talk us out of it. This was our decision." I took a slow breath. "Fine, but that house was paid off. Selling it should have set you up for life. Where's the money?" They exchanged a glance. The kind of glance married couples share when one of them is silently telling the other, "Don't say too much." Mom was the first to answer. "We sold it for $750,000. I swallowed hard. Even knowing the market, the number still made my stomach twist. "And," pressed. Dad leaned back, his voice casual, too casual. "We bought this place. It was a good deal." I glanced around again. Everything in here screamed not a good deal. "How much?" I asked. $600,000, Mom said quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. My jaw dropped. "You bought this for $600,000? And what about the rest of the money?" This time, Dad spoke with a kind of pride in his tone. "We used it. We upgraded. We've worked hard all our lives. We wanted to finally enjoy it." "Enjoy it?" I repeated, my voice rising. Mom jumped in before I could say more. "We got the new SUV. We redid the kitchen. We took those trips we've always dreamed about, Italy in the spring, Bora Bora in the summer. And you know what? We deserved it." For a second, I just stared at them. My own parents, sitting in their glossy new house, justifying blowing through nearly $250,000 in less than a year. "Do you have anything left?" I asked. Silence. "Anything?" I repeated. Dad finally said, "A little, but with the new mortgage, the taxes, the HOA fees, it's going faster than we thought." Mom's voice turned pleading. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. If we don't catch up soon, we could lose this place." I ran my hands over my face, trying to process it all. They had taken a fully paid-off home, turned it into $750,000 in cash. And now they were about to lose the house they replaced it with. And they wanted me to fix it. I think the worst part wasn't even the money. It was the way they looked at me. Like this was inevitable, like I was supposed to step in. Like it was my duty. They didn't look ashamed. They looked entitled. That's when the first flicker of anger lit up inside me. I didn't let it show, not yet. But I knew this conversation was just getting started. And it was going to get ugly. There's a peculiar kind of silence that happens when someone you love has just told you something that fundamentally changes your relationship with them. It's not empty silence. It's heavy, like the air itself is thickened, pressing against your skin, making it harder to breathe. That's what settled over the room after my parents explained what they'd done. I leaned back into the couch, the cushion swallowing me again, but this time I felt like I was sinking into something deeper. A realization that the version of my parents I'd known was slipping away, replaced by strangers and familiar faces. You always said. My voice was quieter now, not because I wasn't angry, but because I was trying not to let it crack. You always said that house would stay in the family. Mom's eyes flickered. Honey. No. I cut her off. You told me and my brother that the house was an investment, that one day it would be ours. You said we'd never have to worry about housing the way you did when you were younger. Dad shifted uncomfortably, looking at the blank TV screen instead of at me. We changed our minds. We needed something newer, easier to maintain. That's not what this is about, I said, my voice sharp now. It's about trust. You didn't just sell a building. You sold our history. That was the house where I learned to ride my bike, where we decorated the Christmas tree in the same corner every year, where Grandpa's old armchair sat in the den, the one you swore you'd never throw out because it still smelled like him after he passed. Mom looked down at her hands. We thought you'd understand. Understand. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You didn't even give me the chance to understand. You kept it secret for 6 months. Do you realize how insane that is? I could have driven past the old place and seen strangers living there without even knowing you sold it. There was a pause. The air felt like it was buzzing with all the things neither of us wanted to say. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. What about the furniture? The photos? All the stuff from the house? Mom hesitated. We sold most of it before we moved. The rest didn't really fit here. I stared at her. You mean you threw it out? It was just stuff, Dad said, with a finality that made my stomach churn. Just stuff, I repeated slowly. Right? Just the rocking chair you used to read to me in. Just the kitchen table with the little chip in the corner from when I dropped my science project. Just the carved initials in the oak tree out front. Yeah, just stuff. I could feel my throat tightening, and I hated that it was happening in front of them. I didn't want them to see me cry because crying would make it seem like I was hurt when I wanted them to understand I was angry. This wasn't just about a physical building. It was about how easily they could take something they knew mattered to me and erase it without warning. And the worst part? The way they talked about it made it sound like they had done nothing wrong. That was when I started to feel something colder than anger. Betrayal. The kind that doesn't just flare up and fade away, but lingers and reshapes how you see someone forever. I sat up straighter, forcing my voice into something measured, even though my pulse was pounding in my ears. So, let me get this straight. You sold the house, spent almost all the money on a new mortgage, vacations, and upgrades, and now you're asking me to bail you out? Mom flinched. Dad's jaw tightened. Yes, Mom said finally, because we're your parents, and family helps each other. I think that was the moment I realized they weren't asking for help. They were expecting it. Like this was some unwritten rule I had no choice but to obey. It made me want to walk right out the door. But something in me needed to hear the rest of the story first. Needed to see just how far down this rabbit hole went. I didn't know it yet, but the next part of this conversation was going to push me from betrayal into outright disbelief. And after that, there was no going back. The living room felt smaller now. Not physically, the ceilings were still high, the windows wide, but emotionally. Like the walls had crept in closer, boxing me in. My parents were both watching me with the kind of expression people have when they're about to deliver a lecture they think you need to hear. Dad leaned forward in his recliner, resting his elbows on his knees. Listen, he began, his tone already carrying that familiar edge I knew from my teenage years. We raised you. We fed you. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. We supported you in college. That wasn't free. I stared at him. You think I owe you for raising me? For doing the bare minimum any decent parent does? Mom made a soft, scandalized noise. Bare minimum? Do you know how much we sacrificed? We didn't go on vacations so you could go to summer camp. We drove the same old car for years so you could have a reliable one for college. We sold the house I grew up in without telling me. I cut in. That stopped her for a beat. But only a beat. Then she straightened in her chair. Family helps each other. You make more money than we ever did. This time you gave back. It was like talking to a brick wall wrapped in guilt trips. You think helping each other means bailing you out of a situation you created? I asked. Dad's voice dropped into the tone he used when I was a kid and about to get grounded. Watch how you talk to your mother. We're not asking for a handout, we're asking for a loan. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was sharp, bitter, not amused at all. A loan? With what repayment plan? You've already proven you can burn through hundreds of thousands of dollars in under a year. They didn't like that. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Dad's jaw worked, like he was grinding down whatever angry words he wanted to say. Then Mom played her next card, the emotional one. Her voice softened, and her eyes started to glisten. We're not getting any younger. Do you really want us to end up homeless? Do you want people to know you let your own parents lose their home? And there it was, the shame tactic. Not just you should help, but you're a bad person if you don't. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. Mom, you're not homeless. You're in a house you can't afford because you wanted an upgrade. That's not the same as someone losing their home because of bad luck or tragedy. This was a choice. Easy for you to say, Dad snapped. You've never had to live paycheck to paycheck like we did. You don't know what it's like to finally have a taste of comfort and be told to give it up. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from breaking. You had comfort. You had security. And you traded it for shiny things and vacations. And now you want me to sacrifice my security to replace yours. Mom's tears started falling, and I knew it wasn't entirely an act. But I also knew she was leaning into them because she'd done it before. She'd used those tears like a lever to move people into doing what she wanted. You're our child, she whispered. And children take care of their parents when they're in need. Something inside me twisted. And parents are supposed to protect their children, even their adult children, from this exact situation. The air went still. None of us moved. Finally, Dad leaned back, shaking his head. I didn't raise you to be selfish. That hit harder than I wanted it to. I felt the sting of it in my chest, like he'd reached in and squeezed my heart with a cold hand. But I also knew exactly what he was doing. Planting the seed of doubt, making me question if I was the bad guy here. And for a split second, it almost worked. But then I remembered the vacations, the SUV, the luxury remodel, the fact that they'd hidden the sale of the house for half a year. And just like that, the guilt started to harden into something else. Resolve. If they thought this conversation was going to end with me writing them a check, they were in for a surprise. And the next thing I was about to say was going to make the temperature in that room drop to absolute zero. Sitting there in their pristine new living room, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, I knew I had to be honest with them, but mostly with myself. They kept talking about how I was making good money and should just help, but they didn't know the whole story. Not even close. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. Look, Mom, Dad, I know you think I'm being selfish, but you don't see what my life looks like. Mom's eyes narrowed slightly, waiting. Dad leaned forward, like he wanted to interrupt, but I held up a hand. I make decent money, yes, but I'm not swimming in cash. I'm still paying off my student loans, about $25,000 left. Their faces flickered, but I pressed on. My fiancé and I are saving for a house. We've been scrimping and budgeting for almost 2 years to come up with a down payment. If I give you $40,000 now, that plan goes out the window. Mom scoffed softly. You've been saving for years. Surely you have more than that. I shook my head. No, because between rent, utilities, groceries, car payments, and my student loans, there's not a lot left over. And that's without emergencies, like when my car broke down last year, or the medical bills we had when my fiancé had surgery. Dad's jaw tightened. But this is your family. You have to prioritize us. I felt a flush of frustration rising. Prioritize my future, too. Because if I give you everything you're asking for, I'm setting myself back years. I'm risking our financial security. Not because I don't love you, but because I have to think about what happens after you. Mom's voice dropped to a near whisper. You think we're going to die soon, don't you? No, I said quickly. But I do think about what happens when you can't work anymore. When you need help. I want to be there for you. But that doesn't mean I have to destroy my future to fix your mistakes. There was a long silence. The kind that fills a room when both sides realize their worlds don't quite line up anymore. I could see the frustration in their eyes, the sense that I was choosing money over family, which couldn't be further from the truth. But I also knew that no amount of explanation would change how they saw me right now. Because this wasn't about money for them. It was about control. After that tense conversation with my parents, I felt exhausted but also strangely clear-headed. I needed to talk to my brother, the one person who shared this mess with me and maybe saw it from a different perspective. I called him that same evening. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking or hadn't slept well. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied. Can we talk? I found out everything. There was a pause. Yeah, I know. I frowned. You know? How? He sighed. Mom told me a while ago. She said they sold the house but kept it quiet. I was furious when I found out. Felt like they'd been lying to me for months. Same here, I said bitterly. And now they want me to save them. Like it's my fault they spent all the money. There was silence on the other end. Then he said quietly, I can't help them. You know me. I'm terrible with money. I can barely cover rent as it is. Neither can I admitted. But at least I've been trying to build something. A future. They don't get that. He laughed, but it was hollow. Yeah, they don't get anything anymore. Over the next few days, the tension in the family grew. Word got out, thanks to a few too many indiscreet relatives, and people started taking sides. Some blamed me for being ungrateful. Others whispered that my brother was irresponsible and couldn't be trusted. I found myself caught in the middle of a storm I never asked for. At one point, my brother texted me, I'm done. I'm not going to enable them anymore. If you're not helping, neither am I. I felt torn. I wanted to be angry, but I also understood. It was like we were both prisoners in a sinking ship, arguing over who had to jump first. The divide was growing. Days passed, but the storm in my chest only grew louder. Every phone call from Mom or Dad felt like a countdown, a ticking clock toward some inevitable breaking point. Then came the text. We need to talk. We're thinking about moving in with you if this doesn't get sorted soon. Reading those words, my heart sank. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum wrapped in desperation. I stared at the message for minutes, my mind racing. How could I say no without feeling like the worst kid in the world? How could I say yes without feeling like I was sacrificing everything I'd worked for? When I finally called them, Mom answered immediately, her voice trembling but steady. Let's talk, she said. I tried to keep my tone calm. Moving in with me? You know my apartment isn't exactly spacious. Dad jumped in on the call, voice firm. We don't have many options. The mortgage is behind, the savings are gone. We can't keep this up. I took a deep breath. I want to help, but you can't just drop into my life without a plan. Mom's voice cracked. You're the only family we have. Please. It was like a punch to the gut. Over the next few days, I wrestled with the decision. Every scenario felt like losing. If I let them move in, my relationship with my fiancé would be strained beyond repair. Our space would be invaded, privacy gone. If I said no, I'd be the villain who abandoned his parents. Sleep became impossible. The idea of having my parents move into my small apartment was suffocating. I loved them, but I'd spent years building a life with my fiancé, a life that was just ours. Suddenly, the walls felt like they were closing in even before they arrived. I sat down with them again, this time determined to be honest. Not just about what I could or couldn't do, but about what needed to happen if we were going to survive this as a family. I want to help, I started carefully. But if you move in, we need rules, boundaries. This can't be a free-for-all where you come and go as you please. Mom's eyes narrowed. We're your parents. We don't need rules. Dad nodded, his tone sharp. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I swallowed my frustration. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to protect my relationship, my job, and my mental health. We all need to respect each other's space. There was silence. Then Mom spoke slowly, voice dripping with disappointment. After everything we did for you, this is how you treat us? It hit me like a punch. Guilt surged again, mingling with anger and exhaustion. Days turned into tense weeks. Every interaction felt like a negotiation, every smile carefully measured. I tried to keep the peace, but inside I was breaking. My fiancé was supportive but distant, worried about what this would mean long-term. Friends stopped inviting me out, sensing the weight I was carrying but not knowing how to help. And my parents? They grew more resentful, more impatient. The more I held firm, the more they pushed back. Passive-aggressive comments, nostalgic stories about the good old days, subtle reminders of what they'd sacrificed for me. One night, I found myself crying alone in the bathroom, overwhelmed by the mess this had become. The air in the apartment had grown thick with tension. Every glance, every word seemed charged, loaded with meaning beyond what was said. My parents were staying with me now, but it felt less like family and more like a ticking time bomb. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find the kitchen in disarray. Dishes piled up, leftovers left to rot. My mom was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, seemingly unaware of the mess. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. Hey, can we talk? She looked up, her eyes tired but defensive. What is it? This place isn't a hotel. We all have to pitch in. She shrugged. I'm not the one who makes the mess. My dad chimed in from the living room, voice sharp. Maybe if you weren't so controlling, things would run smoother. The words hit like a slap. I'm controlling? I echoed, feeling heat rise in my chest. I'm trying to keep some order here. The room went silent, the weight of everything pressing down on us all. Then Mom said, voice low but cutting, you think you're better than us now, don't you? The accusation stung deeper than I expected. No, I said quickly, but the words felt hollow. I just want respect. We gave you everything, Dad said, standing up, eyes flashing. And this is how you repay us? I shook my head. I'm not the one who spent our inheritance on luxuries and then came begging. Their faces went pale. For a moment, the house felt less like a home and more like a battlefield. After that explosive night, things didn't get easier. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. My parents retreated into themselves, and I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, afraid one wrong move would shatter what little was left. The family started to fracture in ways I hadn't anticipated. My brother, who had been distant but neutral, began siding more with them, frustrated by what he saw as my lack of compassion. Our conversations became strained, filled with accusations and misunderstandings. It was as if every word I said was twisted or ignored. I remember one afternoon when my brother cornered me in the kitchen. You think you're the only one struggling? He said, voice low but fierce. We all are. But you act like you're better than us because you make more money. I swallowed hard. It's not about money. It's about responsibility. About not letting people destroy their lives and expect others to clean up the mess. He shook his head. You're tearing this family apart. His words haunted me. Was I really the villain here? Or was I just the one finally saying the things no one else dared to? Meanwhile, the business was bleeding money, the debts piling up. I started stepping in more at work, trying to salvage what I could, but it felt like fighting a losing battle. The weight of their mistakes and my anger threatened to crush me. One evening, I sat alone, staring at spreadsheets and bills, realizing that if I didn't act soon, everything they built would collapse. And strangely, it was no longer just their business on the line. It was my future, my legacy too. I had a choice. Keep trying to fix a broken system or walk away and let the family fall apart. I sat at my desk late into the night, the glow of the computer screen casting sharp shadows across the piles of invoices and contracts. The weight of the past months pressed down on me like a stone in my chest. It was clear if I didn't step in, their business would crumble. And with it, the last thread connecting me to the family I once trusted. I drafted an email to their creditors, proposed new payment plans, and began outlining a strict budget. I called in favors with old clients, promising to personally oversee upcoming events. But this wasn't just business. It was personal. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope between resentment and responsibility. At the same time, I couldn't escape the voice inside me, whispering doubts. Are you the villain? Are you trying to control everything because you feel betrayed? When I told my parents about the changes, their reactions were mixed. Mom accused me of trying to take over. Dad warned I was being too harsh. But I stayed firm. This was the only way to save what was left. The nights were long, the fights harder, but slowly, just slowly, I saw signs of progress. Payments were made on time, clients responded, and the business stopped hemorrhaging cash. For the first time since that cold January morning, I felt like I was not just surviving, I was leading. Just as I began to feel some control over the chaos, new challenges emerged like shadows creeping at dusk. The business, though stabilizing, was still fragile. One wrong move could send it tumbling down. Meanwhile, the emotional wounds in my family ran deep. My parents' resentment simmered beneath the surface, turning small disagreements into explosions. My brother distanced himself even more, caught between loyalty and frustration. One morning, I walked into the office to find a notice taped to the door. A warning from the landlord about overdue rent. Panic bubbled up inside me. How could this happen? I was managing everything. Then the calls came, vendors threatening to cut ties, clients questioning our reliability. I worked around the clock, barely eating, barely sleeping, trying to put out fires before they spread. Through it all, I realized the business wasn't just a company anymore. It was a battlefield for my family's future, my own sanity, and the fragile hope that one day we could rebuild trust. But at what cost? Weeks bled into months, and the strain was unbearable. Every success felt fragile, every mistake magnified. My parents' silent judgment was like a weight on my shoulders, and my brother's cold distance carved a hollow in my heart. One night, after a particularly grueling day, my mom confronted me in the kitchen. "You think you're the savior," she spat, "but you don't understand what you're destroying." I looked her in the eye, voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'm trying to save what's left. If I don't, we all lose." She shook her head. "You've already lost us." Her words cut deeper than any argument. I realized then that no matter what I did, some fractures were beyond repair. Faced with this, I had to decide. Continue fighting a losing battle to hold my family together, or walk away and protect myself. The weight of their expectations had crushed me for too long. I realized that saving their business and keeping the family together wasn't worth sacrificing my own happiness and peace. I sat down with my fiancée one evening, tears threatening to spill as I finally voiced the fears I'd been hiding. "I can't keep doing this," I said. "They want me to fix everything, but I'm drowning." He took my hand, steady and warm. "You have to choose yourself. No one can blame you for that." The next day, I told my parents I wouldn't be able to keep bailing them out. I laid down clear boundaries, financially and emotionally. It was painful but necessary. They were angry, hurt, and yes, disappointed. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of relief, like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself lost in the chaos. The days after I set those boundaries felt like walking through fire. The house was colder, the silences heavier. But beneath that, something shifted. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. My parents needed time to process. Our conversations were strained, often awkward, but slowly they began to understand that love isn't about control or sacrifice at the expense of yourself. It's about respect and balance. My brother finally reached out. We had a long, honest talk where we shared fears and frustrations, not as enemies but as family. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The business is not perfect either, But with clear limits and a new plan, it's stable enough to survive and maybe even thrive. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes loving someone means letting go of the burden of fixing everything. That choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. So, AITA for refusing to keep bailing out my parents after they fired me to save money? Maybe. But I'm learning to be okay with that.